Hey folks, here I am. It's Sam, and I'm here talking today about the 2020 election that's coming up. And I'm going to be today mainly showing some background history and some research. I'm going to be talking also about the election itself and election day. I'm holding off on actual prediction, a total prediction, although I'm going to pretty much let you know what I think is going to be happening. But we don't really even have, Biden isn't formally the candidate yet, and there's other things that still has to happen. But what I want to be doing is talking about this now because it is a very interesting time, of course. You see at the bottom of the screen here, the thing that says nodes in Taurus and Scorpio.com and all that. I do have a web class that's going on now with that. Oh, I see. Someone said, "How can you have a thumbs down before you even speak?" Yeah. That leads to my early, one of my early disclaimers on this video, which is that, we have this is a charged sort of issue here, and I'm going to do it anyway because it's very interesting case studies going on here. But anyway, I did just put a link in the comment field there on the live chat, and it'll be in the comments as well, that I just did, and I have a web class that's going on as the nodes are shifting. The nodes are moving into Taurus, and they're going to be moving September 19th, I think was the exact date. That has a lot to do with where we're going as a country, which is of course going to impact the election a lot. We're going to be going through some changes between now and November that are very important. And I'm going to be talking about some of those things more, and also quite a bit of historical context as well, which has some background that I think would be interesting for everyone to see. So again, you can click that link there if you want to register. It's actually a free class. If you just go to nodes in Taurus and Scorpio.com, you'll see it's a free class there where you just where you can just register and sign up for a time to watch it. But besides that, you can see here. Oh, and I will just make the disclaimer: I'm going to be speaking honestly about some politicians, and if it's not your favorite politician or whatever, you might get triggered. So just be aware. And I'm not going to get a lot of my personal opinions, but I might make factual statements like, he's been losing in the polls, so he's acting this way, or he's been saying these kinds of things which are unprecedented, or he's not handled this situation very well, so this or that. And again, many of these things are very much confirmed at this point by polling and all kinds of stuff. And I'm just going to say those things, and I'm not going to engage in a bunch of arguing about it or whatever. We have to get to a point where we can just speak facts as well. So that being said, again, you can see here that this is the chart of election day. It's November 3rd, 2020. And as you see, by that time, Rahu will have moved into Taurus. It's in Mrigashira. We have the moon also joined that day. So we have a Rahu moon conjunction. Ding, 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 ding. Right? Forget this ascendant because that's just an arbitrary time. But, we also have Mars is retrograde. Mars has gone into Aries and then gone retrograde back into Pisces. Saturn is direct. Jupiter is direct. Now, Saturn is in Capricorn, where he's very powerful, wanting to bring integrity and truth and make a commitment to things that are solid and practical and real and face hard realities, right? Jupiter is in Sagittarius, again, where he's moving forward. Currently, as I record this, they're both retrograde, so they're both going to change direction. Jupiter moving forward in Sagittarius. Again, we're looking for hope and inspiration, and I have some case studies of the last 4 times, or last 5 times, I think, that Jupiter has been in Sagittarius. You might not know this, but elections usually happen, almost always happen with Jupiter in one of 4 signs, in the dual signs. For example, 4 years ago, Trump was elected when Jupiter was in Virgo. right? 4 years earlier, or I'm sorry, and now it's Jupiter in Sagittarius, and so it's every four. You can sort of track the elections by Jupiter's movement often, and so we have this here now, and so Jupiter is in Sagittarius, and we have a historical precedent for that configuration. Again, we also always have the sun debilitated in Libra at the time, the first Tuesday in November. And we have Mercury is going to be here in Virgo. Often Venus is also debilitated at that time. There's an exchange going on, which is good Nichibanga. Venus almost always has Nichibanga when she's debilitated. But so the other thing that happened is Mercury had just turned. Mercury had been retrograde. If I go to the day before, this is election day, which is November 3rd. If I go to November 2nd, Mercury had been retrograde. So on the 3rd, the next day, on election day, Mercury goes what's called stationary direct. So it doesn't actually stop moving. If you look at the degrees, 145, the day before it was 148. So it is, technically 145 is actually it's still a little backwards because 148 would be, but they consider it stationary retrograde, or I'm sorry, stationary direct, but it's still actually lower degree here. So again, Mercury is still moving back a little bit, but it had just stopped going backwards on this day. So this is called stationary direct, which is a time of tension where energy gets kind of stuck. And so, just a sort of backdrop of the things that we're seeing or the things that we're hearing right now. And again, this is not really astrological at all, but even just the political environment that we see right now, about 3 months out. Again, these are unprecedented kinds of things. We've never heard a president of the United States saying things like what the president is saying now, which is, this is going to be the most rigged election ever. Okay, isn't it your job to make sure it's not? You're the chief executive. You're supposed to ensure that elections aren't rigged, right? Okay, and he's saying it's going to be rigged because of absentee ballots and voting. Again, no proof. This has been researched to death. He even appointed someone to research voter fraud early in his administration, and they came back and said, sorry, it doesn't exist. And that was actually someone who was very sympathetic to the president. So anyway, we already see this foreshadowing of not trusting the results and having a lengthy count happening as well. Because of COVID, we're going to be having a lot of mail-in ballots and all this. We already see, even several months out, certain things that are set up and shown in the chart, just in general, which is, again, Mercury stationary direct after being retrograde, Mars retrograde. And again, the nodes are here. We have the moon joined Rahu. So on election day, so again, that day, because this is an event chart, the moon is joined Rahu. So already we can see confusion, right? And Rahu is about fraud, paranoia, theorizing, conjecture, those kinds of things. So we see already a backdrop here. This is why I want to talk about this part of it quite a bit in this class, or in this video. Besides things like that, I also want to show some history, some historical background. And in particular, again, as I say, there's a few things that I find really interesting right now. And this is one. Again, I went back and looked at the last 5 elections with Jupiter in Sagittarius, going back to 1960. So that's 60 years, right? And again, we have 1960 Jupiter in Sagittarius was John F. Kennedy's first term. 12 years later, Nixon, the Republican incumbent, wins by a landslide. In fact, I think it was the largest margin of victory ever, except for Ronald Reagan's 1984. Republican incumbent, wins by a landslide. These two are unprecedented victories in our modern times. Nixon just destroyed McGovern, and Reagan destroyed Mondale. So we have John F. Kennedy in the first, or in the first one that I'm looking at here, 1960, and then we have, and he's a young Democrat, representing the new, the new decade, of the 60s. Then we have two Republican icons getting reelected. So Nixon was first elected in 68. Then he won a gigantic landslide in 72. Reagan was initially elected in 1980. Huge landslide reelection in 1984. Again, Jupiter and Sagittarius. The next one was Clinton, who was an incumbent, another incumbent who won by a landslide. Clinton was elected in 1992. 1996, he was up for re-election. Huge win over Bob Dole. Bob Dole lost, historically. Part of it is because Clinton, by that time, was practically a Republican. He might as well have been. He had pivoted so much to the center, co-opted the Republican talking points. Since Bill Clinton, the middle of his first term, the middle of 92, since the middle of his first term in the mid-90s, the Democratic Party, what they used to be, which was for working people and wages and all that labor and all that, they were co-opted by the Republican, by the right, and Bill Clinton moved the whole Democratic Party to the right. And of course, the right, the Republicans also kept moving to the right. So we're a very right-leaning country, at least as far as our government and politics go. Bill Clinton was the last real, Democrat. Obama was then elected in 2008. I guess it's a political opinion. Maybe you don't agree, but by the time we get to Obama, he was so conservative for a Democrat, for what a Democrat used to be, that this is why we've had almost 30 years, 25 to 30 years almost of what used to be a Democrat, which actually looked a lot like what Bernie Sanders sounded like in this last election. Bernie Sanders 30 years ago would have been maybe a little bit of a left-leaning Democrat, but he's actually in many ways very centrist. Now, of course, he has to call it democratic socialism, which went a little haywire. But anyway, aside from that, the country moved so far to the right in the early 90s that by the time we got to Obama, he was already so centrist in Democrat that he was almost right-leaning. But anyway, so when we look at Clinton, the incumbent, he wins by a landslide in 96. Again, Jupiter was in Sagittarius. And I only mention this because we have this very liberal back here in 1960. All three of these, again, by the time Clinton won, it's not like he was a Republican, but he had been so much in the center. He was such a centrist by that time. It was almost hard to say he was a meat and potatoes Democrat or whatever. Then we get to Obama by 2008, his first term. His first term, it was that audacity of hope, that hope and change, and a black man, and it was this wave of hope that Obama represented, that, wow, here in America, with our slave-owning history, we've elected a black man. And regardless of even how he even governed, his election was similar to Kennedy's in that sense, in that it was this wave of hope that came. And just like it was with Kennedy, Kennedy in 1960 came, and no, I'm not old enough to remember, but he came after we'd been through World War II, and we'd been through very conservative policies. Now, again, even though they were Democratic parties, I don't talk that much. Parties are kind of this politics. I'm talking about policies. Again, one of the things we're going through now in this country, in the U.S., is we're so hypnotized by these labels and these political parties that we don't even look at policies anymore. If it's a Democrat, it's good. If it's Republican, it's bad. Or Republican, good. Democrat, bad. We're not even looking at policies anymore. Like, what are the policies? So we had come from, when we elected John F. Kennedy, we had 8 years of Eisenhower. Again, he was Republican and very conservative, but also for the time, I mean, Eisenhower now would be a centrist Democrat probably. Nixon certainly would have been in many ways. Nixon's the one that developed the EPA. Again, so we're at a point now that's so far right to where the country used to be with wage disparities and earned income disparities between the wealthy and the poor. That's really the thing that's going on. You could put any face on it that you want, Republican or Democrat. That's actually what's happened. Is the working people have much less. My father bought a house, and everybody can make this claim, make this statement. Even through the 80s, people could buy a house on working like a manual labor job. Literally one job. You could I remember, my uncle was a janitor in a high school. He was the janitor of a high school. That was his job for 40 years. And he bought a house and raised 2 kids in it with a wife and 2 kids. Because what used to happen is the wage disparity, you could actually, if you worked 40 hours a week, you could make enough to earn or to afford buying a house and having a living. So what's happened is our politics, when I say shifted right, again, so there are some people getting triggered saying, oh, you're a liberal, oh, you're this, you're that. It's just, right just means toward, the business and away from the people in that sense. Maybe that's not the good term to use, but these are the policies. That's just how the country has shifted. It's just a matter of research. Look at how wages, even though there's more wealth, the people aren't earning it, and people can't make a living wage to be like a janitor in a high school and buy a house and raise kids on it. He did that through the 80s. Again, so it's not since the early 90s have we had an economic system that is supporting the people. So anyway, enough of that. Let me get back to this. But you should understand this is a big shift. So when Kennedy came, it was after 8 years of Republican. Eisenhower and Nixon was the vice president. Then Kennedy came and showed this wave of hope. Then we had all of this conservatism, for the most part, in these Jupiter in Sagittarius cycles. This is all Jupiter and Sagittarius elections. And then Obama came, and there's another wave of hope. And when Obama campaigned, it was on hope. I was hopeful for Obama because he was saying things that were actually traditional Democratic talking points, especially about things like transparency. We had just come through the Gulf War. George Bush was not popular. And also things like allowing, for example, one of the issues that I've always dealt with is wanting to eat, there was a big focus on non-GMO foods and organic, and allowing people to have freedom of choice around certain things. And he didn't do any of it. His Department of Agriculture, his agricultural head was the head of Monsanto, and he came in and put all these corporate people in the government. And so again, this is what made a lot of people where Obama disappointed people, right? But it's still the wave of hope. We're talking about an election. Obama and all of them are now plugged into this system that is so corrupt, and we're so used to the corruption, we don't even realize we've been robbed blind for 40 years. Most people don't even know it because that's what they're used to. Didn't used to be like that. It literally used to be where people could afford even a modest job to own a house, raise kids, and not have to work 15 jobs with nobody being able to afford. College wasn't where you had to mortgage your whole life away to go to college. So we're acclimated to that now. But we're talking about now I'm talking about the kind of ideas that swing an election. What are people thinking? So Jupiter and Sagittarius, these are the choices. History shows incumbents win by a landslide to be the most likely. Incumbents winning by a landslide, especially a Republican, conservative one, this favors Trump. But it may also show a new, possibly young and inspiring leader like a Kennedy or an Obama. And again, you can see both of these possibilities when you look at Jupiter and Sagittarius. So again, this is an astrology course, not a politics, not Sam's, politics, but Sam's political opinions. But Jupiter and Sagittarius is kind of both. It's that hope. And it's also this kind of conservatism and a kind of rigid orthodoxy at times. It can kind of cut both ways. It's more religious than spiritual, right? But it's also much more political than it is mystical. Because Pisces is more mystical and Jupiter is more political. like law and inspiring, inspiring people that inspire us to a better world. But that's pretty much out of the question, at least the young part. So what we're probably going to get, it looks like, is a choice between Trump or Biden. Of course, both of them are old. None of them are young. And as I said, the rhetoric that's already surrounding all of this is, we can see it. And we even, we see Biden coming out and saying he's going to try to, either steal the election or cast doubt on the election, or all this idea that if Trump does lose, he's not going to leave, and all this. What if he doesn't? What if there isn't a peaceful transfer of power? All of this stuff is already surrounding an election. It's never happened like that before. Never. Where we've had this kind of buildup to an election, right? So we need to remember that. Now, this is something that I found to be very, very compelling as well. There's a man named Alan Lichtman, and he's predicted every presidential victory since 1980, I think it was. And he even predicted Trump would win in 2016. He kind of fudged on it a little bit because Trump was such a wild card. He wasn't sure, but all of the factors that he laid out, all the factors that Lichtman laid out, favored Trump in the ultimate analysis. And I put them down here, which I'll go over in a second. But he successfully predicted based on this. And I remember in 2016, I went back and looked and saw how he broke it down. And it's very interesting because it almost has nothing to do with the challenger. It's totally a referendum on the current administration, all of his criteria. And it's predicted, again, like everyone since Carter and Reagan. I think that was the first one that he got right. You could go look. I'll put the link in the to this New York Times article. I've also seen a few interviews with him lately. I saw him in 2016. But it's based on things like, it's all based on the current administration and the response and how well the current administration has been doing its job. So in fact, what it winds up showing is that the voters are much more savvy and much more voting in their own interests than we might give people credit. We might say, well, people are just triggered and whatever. They're not really paying attention to what's going on. And actually his criteria shows that, yeah, they pretty much are. They are really paying attention to what's going on. And there's some measurable criteria through which you can assess what they're paying attention to, and then telltale signs of whether or not the current administration is worthy of being reelected, like whether or not they've earned it. And so he goes through, it's actually 13 criteria. One is midterm gains. Now, Trump loses here because there was big midterm gains. They took back the House. No primary contest. That's a benefit for Trump because he wasn't primaried. Again, this is all about the incumbents. So were there midterm gains against the incumbents? Yes. Was there a primary contest? No. Like, for example, in 1992, when Bill Clinton won his first term, George Bush was primaried. Pat Buchanan actually staged a very vigorous primary against George Bush the first and his reelection. So Pat Buchanan primaried George W. Bush and he lost. And another example is, he just popped into my head. Who was it? Oh yeah, Jimmy Carter in 1980. Jimmy Carter had a vigorous, primary from Ted Kennedy. And so again, the incumbent being primaried was a key indicator of whether or not he would win or lose. So that's a mark against the incumbent. So in this case, he wasn't primaried. Incumbent seeking re-election, that's a great benefit. So if it's an incumbent seeking re-election, that's going to be a great benefit. So it shows the benefit of already being president to getting reelected. So again, these are just 13 points, and they're not weighted. What happens is the incumbent has to get at least 6 of them. If the incumbent gets 6 of them in their favor, then you can predict that the incumbent will win. No third-party challenger? No, that's not the case here. George W. Bush in 1992 had 2 of these strikes against him. He was primaried by Pat Buchanan, and we had Ross Perot in there. Short-term economic gains, and then long-term economic gains. So short-term economic gains was in Trump's favor. Now that we've had COVID and we've lost all these jobs, this goes against him now. Again, economy and whether or not in the short term things are going well. Again, this was something that George W. Bush in 92 also had against him. We were in a recession. Long-term economic gains, which means in general, is the economy doing well? Like this was what really benefited Ronald Reagan and whatnot. And again, neither of these things benefited Jimmy Carter back in 1980 and whatnot. Both of these things really benefited Bill Clinton in his reelection because it was a time of prosperity. And these things actually really benefited George W. Bush in 2004, even though he got us into that unpopular war. Most of the economic stuff was in his favor. So even because the economy was still doing quite well and people were not going to vote against it, right? So the economy being important. And again, this is just 1 for or 1 against. Trump, I don't remember how Lichtman kept this. I think he had long-term economic gains was in Trump's favor. Short-term was in his detriment. Major policy changes, there was none. Trump hasn't done any major policy changes, major like Obama and healthcare, right? It was a major policy like restructuring all kinds of things. Trump has tried to. He's sort of attempted with some things like immigration, building the wall. But most of what Trump does, it's rhetoric. He just talks a lot. There's not a lot that he's done. He hasn't implemented any major policy changes where the policy shifts of the United States is now something different. And again, George W. Bush did. And this is in the favor. This benefits the incumbent. What was the major policy change that George W. Bush did? The Iraq War. And even though it was unpopular, because it was some new major direction for the country, a new major direction for the country benefits the incumbent, even if it's unpopular amongst a lot of people. It's the sign, what it signifies, and it's very interesting. It signifies that he's a strong leader. He's making major policy changes, and we're all, as a country, in it. It shows a sign of leadership, and it shows a sign of coming together. Because when there are major policy changes like that, the country will tend to come together. By the way, I'm just going to say this very directly. Donald Trump was handed an absolute gift with COVID, especially after all that impeachment stuff. When COVID first came, and it first came here, his numbers went up because what happens is the country will rally around the leader in times of a crisis. And this is the principle that Lichtman is talking about here. Even if it's something unpopular, something we didn't want, we'll rally around the leader in times of a crisis. And Trump's numbers initially went up when COVID first started. He was handed a gift. All he needed to do is rally the country around it, be coherent, be uplifting, and instead, that's not what's happened, needless to say. Be somewhat coherent, listen to experts, develop some kind of national policy and strategy to get us through it, to keep us together. And that would have fulfilled this for sure, because he could have implemented some major policy changes or satisfied this capacity for us to rally around this. In fact, he knows this, and he even came out right away using that rhetoric. Trump said, I'm a wartime president. It's a war. And because he knows being a wartime president, yay, the country will rally around you. And he started saying that stuff because he knows. But then look at what's happened. It's dragged on, all the incompetence, all the confusion. And now this has become a major albatross around his neck. The way it's been handled and the economic problem. And again, this is just polling. This isn't Sam's opinion. We can see it even in the numbers in the world where we've never flattened the curve because I think a large part of it is because the president has never said, keep wearing masks. He didn't say wear masks until 3 months into it. Ridiculing people wearing masks, making out like it's a hoax and all this stuff, trying to get everybody back out and about even by the end of April, trying to rush everything back too fast. Again, so This is a principle of election strategy, or of being able to predict who's going to win an election. And Lichtman has dialed into this, right? So then also no social unrest. Now, again, Trump doesn't get benefit on this. We've had a ton of social unrest. Again, it hasn't been as much, but especially now as we're going into the election. And it's wild because he's run these ads. I've seen these ads where he says, this is what it's like in Joe Biden's America. This is what it's going to be like in Joe Biden's America. And it's videos of Donald Trump's America. It's like, what? Do you want to remind people of your America? This isn't Joe Biden's America. He's not president. You are. And they show pictures of riot of people protesting in Trump's America. It's like, wait a second. Did I miss something? It's not Joe Biden's America. It's your America. So social unrest, definitely against the incumbent. No scandal, of course. No way. He's been nothing but scandal. Okay? Again, it's no foreign or military failure. Now, Lichtman actually gave this a benefit to Trump. I'm not sure why, but I think there's been quite a few foreign failures, especially being perceived as far as with Putin and things like that. I don't think that's a benefit to him, but Lichtman actually gave this as a benefit to Trump, that there's been no foreign or military failure. I think he means losing a war, etc. Foreign or military success, again, he gave it. I think he gave this one to Trump as well. I'm not sure why. I don't remember. But charismatic incumbent. Now, some people thought that that Trump would get this, and he's certainly charismatic amongst his people. But when Lichtman is talking about being charismatic, he's talking about charismatic like Reagan. Reagan was charismatic across. He was liked by everyone. Even Bill Clinton, even though Clinton was more polarizing, Clinton was charismatic, and there was a lot of Republicans and a lot of people that found him to be likable. Obama, same way. You see a certain universal charisma. Again, there's also a lot of people that don't like him, but it's not like Trump. Trump has charisma amongst his base, so to speak, if you want to call it that. But he's also so polarizing that he couldn't really give him this charisma point. And then uncharismatic. And by the way, he gave him the charisma point in 2016. He said that Trump was very charismatic, and the other one is the uncharismatic challenger. Just like in 2016, Hillary Clinton wasn't charismatic. Joe Biden is not charismatic, right? So in 2016, there was no incumbent. So that wasn't part of it, but the incumbent party was looked at. But again, he gave Donald Trump the charisma point in 2016, and the challenger did not get was uncharismatic. So here though, he's taken him off of the charisma equation because he's so polarizing. But he does benefit from the uncharismatic challenger, which means, Joe Biden is not charismatic either. So that's a wash. So what Lichtman wound up, I think his thing was 5 for Trump, 5 benefits, and then I guess 8 against him, based on this criteria. And based on this criteria, he thinks Trump is going to lose. Oh, by the way, he also predicted Trump was going to get impeached. This was before he ever this was right when he came into office. He predicted Trump would be impeached as well, based on other criteria. This guy is really good at predicting this stuff. He has other criteria to see if someone would get impeached, and he predicted that. But anyway, so again, he predicted Trump would win in 2016 and he had a big asterisk though. He's like, but it's hard to know because he's such an outlier. We don't really know. But based on the criteria, it looks like he could win, and he did. So I think it's very interesting to look at these objective, and this criteria is very objective. It's not about politics or ads or whatever. It's basically how the people perceive the leaders. And most of the criteria is pretty right on, especially about economies, foreign victories or failures, other kinds of things where, you can see if, like foreign, military failures or successes, social unrest, scandals, third-party challengers, which is very, a third-party challenge is a very practical consideration, because what happens is if there's a serious third party challenger to the incumbent, then the president has to spend all this time trying to win a primary. And it shows the benefit of already being president to not have to go through like what Joe Biden just went through. Because, you know, those primaries are very hard on challengers, because we just went through months of watching Joe Biden get debated and beaten up by his own party. It's inevitable, right? And so when there's an incumbent, it's automatically an advantage because you don't have to go through that. So, and again, in 2016, there were no incumbents. So we watched both candidates have to go through the debates. So I find it very interesting in that criteria, you know, to look through things in that way. And I want to bring up the charts again and just bring up the charts of a couple of, I do have Biden and Trump here. Again, we don't know if it's going to be Biden. We do know that that is going to be Trump, and it's almost 99.9% going to be Biden. But, you know, I like to deal in probability, or in actualities, not probabilities. So I find all of this stuff even to be more interesting. You know, this history and this, you know, this perspective, I think is very interesting. Hang on a second. So, again, some very interesting things to look at on election day. So, again, we have Moon Rahu here. Now, if we look at Trump's chart, he's having this Rahu Ketu return. Again, they're coming right back to his natal place, which is very powerful. And his, especially his moon getting hit by Ketu here is very significant for me, because the Ketu, you know, it's obviously a Rahu Ketu return, but especially it's bringing up this part of his nature, you know, the sun in the 10th and the moon in the 4th, and this eclipse. He's in Jupiter Saturn Dasha. Now, again, one of the things about Trump, he's easier to look at because we can go back and see when he was elected. He was elected in Rahu Mars. Now, just, you know, full disclosure or whatever it might be, I didn't make a formal prediction for 2016 because we didn't have Hillary Clinton's birth time. And it's just, I just didn't feel comfortable doing it. And there were some people who did, and they used other criteria to get around Hillary not having a birth chart. And all of that's good. I just chose not to do it on that level. I did, however, much earlier in the process, cast a lot of doubt that I ever thought Trump would be able to win, especially earlier in the primary process. But I also saw that he absolutely could win with those dashas, with that Rahu Mars, because Rahu is a major Raja Yoga planet for him in the 10th house, joined his sun, very strong. Again, it forms a Raja Yoga in the 10th house. This is why he's always been in the public spotlight, always been well known and things like that. And Mars, as the Raja Yoga planet, Raja Yoga Karaka in his 1st house, again, is also a major Raja Yoga planet for him. It's the 9th Lord in the 1st and 4th Lord in the 1st. Shows a lot of things like why he's interested in real estate and all kinds of other things. But Rahu Mars is like him at the sort of pinnacle of his power. I mean, as far as favorability and ability to, you know, I've said this before, that I think the time of his life that he'll remember, the happiest time in his life, no matter what anybody says. He's president now, but I don't think this is anywhere close to the happiest time in his life. I think the happiest time in his life was when he was going around campaigning, standing up in stadiums. I mean, you can see that he has a time of his life now doing that thing he loves to do. But especially before he was president, and now he has all these enemies and all this scrutiny, and he's so managed. When he was campaigning, especially once his campaign started to get traction and everybody was paying attention to him, Everybody wanted to hear what he said, and he was always getting interviewed, and he was in rallies, and he was standing up just telling the world whatever he wanted to say, right? Just going. That was where he's like, this is living. That was Rahu Mars. And you can totally see it. Since right after he got elected, he went into Jupiter. And it's a whole different dasha. Now he's president. So Jupiter definitely has power here. It's retrograde. It's the fifth lord. It's retrograde in the second. But you can see since he became president, his ability to just say, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want, that's not his life anymore. He's got handlers, and everything he wants to do or say, there's at least half as many people against him publicly, and it's total pressure and all like this. Not only that, when he went into Jupiter Saturn, which was the beginning of last year, this is like right after the 2018 midterms, and all of the females came into Congress, and he's gotten impeached, and it's even more like it's gotten less and less fun as it goes on. And so the election is happening in Jupiter Saturn. And again, this is not this in his Jupiter Saturn dasha. Again, whether people want to see this or not, Trump did not want to get impeached. No way he wanted to get impeached. Whether you say, well, he beat it or whatever, he didn't. He got impeached. He wasn't removed from office, but he got impeached. Just like Bill Clinton. No president wants to get impeached. So Jupiter Saturn, he was impeached. It's been more and more resistance. His poll numbers, his popularity it's just been diminishing and diminishing. And again, there are people who don't want to believe this stuff, but we have demographic data from the 2016 election. We know why he was able to squeak out a victory. And it's because independents overwhelmingly voted for him, independent voters. Many of these voted for Obama earlier, but they were tired of the same old thing. And Hillary Clinton was not likable. She was not liked. So most of the independents, I think it was almost 60-40, if not even a little bit more, went for Trump. Ever since many of the things started happening that were extremely unconventional, like with Putin and with other scandals and all this, he's shed independent support consistently. And I think the last polling I saw, he was, I think, in the tank 70-30 amongst independents. Again, this is one of the reasons why he even made it close in 2016. He lost by 3 million votes. And he's only president because we have electoral college, and he managed to squeak out electoral college victory in 3 states by 70,000 votes. I mean, it was the narrowest of margins. If you play poker, there's a thing called an inside straight, where you can draw one card that can win, and he drew it. And he won the electoral college. But he still lost by 3 million votes. And it was, again, 70,000 votes in 3 states. That is such a tenuous margin of victory. In fact, less people voted for him. So the point is that even that vote was buttressed by several demographics: independents, women, especially white women, white suburban women. This is why he keeps doing things now to try to get some of that vote back, because he reads polling, and as much as he says he does it, he does. Probably more than anybody. And his support amongst those demographics has just really shrunk, and it's very much diminished. He's not a uniter. He hasn't since he's become president. He has not tried to reach out to other demographics. And again, this isn't just my opinion. You can just look anywhere. The Republican Party in general are like, will you try to grow your base a little bit? It's always doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on that base, and it just takes away. It's just subtractive. So we already know that his path to victory anyway would be hard, even if nothing changed. Even if he just had a more charismatic challenger, it would be hard. But now he's got a record to run on, and it makes it that much more difficult. His dashas also absolutely do not support it. Rahu Mars was so much more favorable for him winning an election. These Raja Yoga planets, Jupiter, Saturn. Saturn is the 6th house ruler for Leo. It's in his 12th house with Venus. It's very low. It's Sandhi. Very, very, since the beginning of 2019. Look at what's happened since the beginning of last year. Again, it's just very weak and unfocused and ungrounded. So he'll have to get elected in that dasha cycle. And again, he got elected, and the one before was much stronger. So again, even though historically and whatnot, especially Republican incumbents would be ready to boss, ready to knock it out of the park, this looks very tough. Just to get enough votes. Again, he got 3 million less votes against one of the most unpopular Democratic candidates ever. And she still got 3 million more votes. So when we look at Biden, it's interesting, the similarities, because Biden has an ascendant that's also Scorpio. So he's going to have Ketu going through his first house, Rahu going through his seventh house, and going over his natal Saturn. Again, this Ketu going through the first house, again, that also tends to like make you a little bit invisible, right? And it's not like he's invisible, but there's even the rhetoric of hiding in his bunker and stuff like that. Now, although Ketu by transit right now isn't in his first house, but if we just look at his chart here, we see that he's got Venus and the Sun in the first house. And, this is pretty powerful, very strong identity factors here, just in general, with the Sun and Venus in his first house in Scorpio. He's got a Jupiter aspect onto these planets, Sun, Venus, in his natal chart, which certainly gives him a lot of, inspiration. He's an inspired, or he speaks in the words of unity and all that kind of stuff. He always has, although he's had some real problems with plagiarism and stuff. My first reckoning with Biden was in 1988. I remember when he was running for president then, and he had to drop out because he plagiarized some politician from England or something. And then I remember him in the Anita Hill hearings, just sitting up there with a bunch of Democrats. Anita Hill when Clarence Thomas was put on the bench. And, Biden was just this, to me, like a kind of phony smiling politician. When Obama plucked him out and made him a vice president, I thought it was a good choice for Obama. That was a savvy vice president, because again, Obama was, wanted to be the first black president. And here's smiling conservative, not conservative, but smiling, likable, quote, knowable Joe Biden, white guy, to make everybody, come on, is it okay? Is it okay? So, and Trump is correct in Trump said that it's not a very flattering thing to say. And again, not to speak badly of Biden. I'm trying to speak badly of anybody, but to just be honest. But, Trump even said that Joe Biden was on the trash heap or something. I mean, he said it a very crass way, but he's like, Obama pulled him off the trash pile or something, or he was forgotten about until Obama pulled him out as vice president. Nobody would even be thinking about Joe Biden right now, which isn't entirely wrong. But that's the way life works. We have our fortunes, and he and Obama forged a partnership, and Biden was vice president, and now he's very well known. And, that popularity and that name recognition is also really important, and that familiarity that people have with Biden. Especially because he definitely represents, for good or bad, whatever you want to think, a return to something normal, or something that we're used to, or something that's not what we have now, which is God knows what's coming the next day. We're going to wake up and the center of attention is going to be the president trying to do something to get everybody's attention. Again, we're just not used to that. We've gotten used to it for the last few years, but, for the rest of our lives, we're not used to, even with Obama or George Bush or others, the presidents are trying to work jobs. They're not doing things to try to say, hey, listen to the latest crazy thing I've said. Look at me here. I'm important over here or something. We've gotten acclimated to the current president's just need to be the focal point of our lives. Again, and I'm just saying this objectively. If you think that's just me hating on Trump, okay, but is that what's happened? Meanwhile, what I'm saying is Biden represents a time when we actually were living our lives, and there was the president and there was the government and there were things happening, and they were kind of part of our life, but it wasn't like we were utterly consumed with all of this like going on. I say this intentionally because, again, like I said at the beginning, we're going to have a shift of the nodes are going into Taurus. I'm sorry, Rahu is going into Taurus. And I said it even in my Rahu and Taurus update that we're going to be really motivated here real soon to want to find something that's stable and solid and not for a while. We're going to be wanting that thing real soon. By the middle of September, when Rahu goes into Taurus, we're going to be looking for things to be more calm and peaceful and settled. And regardless of anything else you might say about the two men, Trump or Biden, as you like this one, you don't like that one, Democrat, Republican, whatever, it would be impossible almost to say that just as two people, that Biden doesn't represent something that it's stable to the point of being boring. And maybe some of us think that, a little boring from the government wouldn't be so bad for a while, considering what's been happening. It used to be, if not boring, at least something that was stable, where there were professionals and there was thoughtfulness, and we were careful before we said, oh, there was a bombing in Beirut. Oh, I think it was a bomb. I think it was a bomb. And the president of the United States is just saying that it was a bomb when we don't know what it was, or whatever the thing is. back when it was like, okay, this is an important job. It's thoughtful. It's stable. Again, regardless of anything else you might think. And I really think that favors Biden in the mind of the population, of the public. Now, again, there's many other reasons why people are voting, because, again, there's all kinds of things going on now, especially with who we think Trump really is, that he's actually, saving us from the deep state, or all kinds of other things that are being said right now. I'm not going to get into all those things. I'm looking at people's mindsets, the tradition, what we're seeing in the world relative to what we've seen before. Again, to me, these are just objective observations. Maybe you don't agree, or it's me hating on Trump or this or that. I don't know. If it is and it offends you, I am sorry. But I have to just be honest. We haven't seen this kind of disarray and just kind of chaos ever. And the fact that we're moving into a more stable, or a desire for something more stable, definitely also to me favors Biden. So again, when you look at his dashas, it's very tricky though. And when I start looking at the predictions, which again, I'm going to do another video where it's just the predictions, where I break down just the two charts and the election, and also the chart of the United States. There's a few other things I have to do before I really do just a, just a prediction, video or a report. This is more like an overview and the overall impressions that I see now, and the trends from the past, historically, which again, historically, it favors Trump. There's no question about it. It favors Trump. Historically, it favors Trump with especially a conservative incumbent winning in a landslide. It favors him. I think if he still can be, maybe he can still do it. There's still a few months left. Who knows? Elections are fluid. A lot can happen. He could suddenly represent what's more stable, and things could happen that could make that happen as well. Again, it's why I'm not making a full prediction at this point, but I am talking about the parameters that I think are the most important now, that are going to be driving the decisions. And again, we're also, when it comes to the actual, when we have the election, we already know, or we can speculate that there's going to be so much confusion around it, because the president's already been saying it. He's preparing us for it. It's going to be rigged. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. I'm sorry, but it almost sounds like he knows he doesn't have the votes. I mean, again, doesn't take a genius to see this. Is already preparing for when, I mean, he could just get thumped. If you look at polling, he's losing in all of those battleground states. He's almost behind in Texas. I mean, and again, you could say, the polling was wrong in 2016. It actually wasn't. The margin of error was about 3 to 6 points, and Hillary won by 3 points. But again, in those couple states, he eked out a victory, which again, he deserves it. But it's 70,000 votes in 3 states. But the polling then was also very much back and forth. You know, Trump hasn't been ahead in battleground states and polling this year, I don't think. I think, maybe that's an exaggeration, but for months and months now. And he's like way behind in all of these states. And you can actually see why. Look, and it's not something that's in Lichtman's formula, but I'll say this. One of the things that I noticed, and one of the reasons why I think Joe Biden is a better candidate than Bernie Sanders, at least to beat Trump this time, is because Bernie Sanders represented more of this. Bernie Sanders was like, we're going to have a socialist revolution. And look at what the Democrats did. This is part of my calculus as well. Look at what the Democrats did in their primary. They had an opportunity to vote for a candidate that's going to represent, let's shake everything up again. Let's have a socialist revolution, like revolution, and more like upheaval. The country is worn out, I think, of this daily drama. You saw it even with Democrats. And Bernie Sanders is pretty liked in the Democrats, and he was ahead. And suddenly what happened is the whole party said no, and they organized around this stable candidate. And by the way, it wasn't taken from Bernie Sanders. People showed up and voted. He never got more than about 35%. And when the field was dispersed, that was enough to carry those primaries. But then once it was between the big change candidate of Bernie Sanders, we're going to change everything, and stable Joe Biden, they all went to stable Joe Biden. And I think this is going to be one of the most determinative factors here. Plus, again, especially with those, we know how elections get won. They get won with these swing voters that aren't party loyal, suburban voters, people that, again, they're not paying much attention. They're just like, who would be the best? Yeah, this guy. In 2016, it was like, we don't really know Trump very well, but what's been happening isn't working. And Hillary, she's been around forever. Let's take a chance on this guy. This year, given that I also see that Rahu is going to go into Taurus and we're going to want things to be stable more, given that we know who Biden is and he represents stability, and also given the fact that, quite frankly, between Trump and Biden, policy-wise, Biden is very conservative Democrat. Who but the most hardcore right wing in the country is going to feel so terrible voting for Joe Biden? I mean, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not like you're voting for Bernie Sanders. This is why I said I think almost Biden, I think as much as Bernie Sanders' policies might fire up his base more or something, I think where the country is now is more wanting more of that stability. And by the way, older people vote. This is also one of the reasons why, as much as some younger people might get so fired up, like it happened with Bernie Sanders, he had a lot of the young vote. They didn't show up to vote. It's a lot of these older people who are just like, okay, Trump was fine, but this is just too much. Not to mention the way COVID has been handled right now, and healthcare and all these issues are real. And I think Biden represents that stability. So my first hit on it is, even though Trump historically, I think, had a big advantage, and I really do think that Trump was handed a gift, at least an electoral gift, with COVID, because people rally around the leader when there's a crisis. And I think he knows that. That's why he said, I'm a wartime president and this is a war. But then to say it obviously, it's almost like he's kind of lost the war. If you're going to declare a wartime president, and we're still dealing with this in a much worse way than any other developed country, we don't have any testing. Again, people who don't like me saying that, okay, then just tell me in the comments before you say that I'm a, communist or whatever. What's his plan? What's the strategy now? What is it? What's the strategy to get us back to schools? What's the strategy for testing? What are we doing? What's the national strategy? There is none. There hasn't been. And so it could have really been a boon, and it hasn't. And I think if he would have handled it well, I think he would have slid into I think he would have coasted into re-election, impeachment and all that notwithstanding. But now we're seeing the biggest problem, which to me has always been, is incompetence. Incompetence in the sense of just not knowing how to manage what he's doing, not knowing what he's doing. And so I think that's going to really cost him. And again, there's a lot that can still happen. There's a lot that can still happen. But my first hit, based on the historical, based on history, based on other things that I talked about, Alan Lichtman is compelling in those points that he put forth. It really lands a lot of principles that show why we vote the way they do. It's been a model that's predicted every president. But then when we look right now, we see Biden, both of their transits and their astrology is mixed. And I want to be able to dive more deeply into that, to be honest with you. Again, because I haven't looked as much at Biden. I did look at Trump. And again, like I said, he was elected in Rahu Mars, which is like the most powerful dasha of his life, pretty much. And then now he's in Jupiter and Jupiter Saturn. That's a heavy lift with these two planets. With Biden, he's in Jupiter. He's got that Jupiter in the 9th house, and it's Jupiter Rahu in his 10th house. Rahu is also the ruler of Mars and Swati. So again, I'm going to do another dedicated video just to the two charts, the chart of the USA and whatnot. This was more of an overview of the energies, where I see things going, some historical precedent, the two charts laid out next to each other. I haven't been looking at the comments, so if people are giving me a hard time or whatever, I haven't seen it. So, and honestly, I don't really care. But I am going to put, as you see, I put the links in there again of that nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. It's one of the main things that I've been doing here lately is, or I just finished it. This shift of the nodes from Gemini into Taurus is really huge. It's a big cultural shift that we're going through. Again, Rahu in Gemini has been very, bunch of ideas and questioning our beliefs so that we, so that we go to the next level, really. I mean, we've seen so much change, social changes, especially around a lot of, social issues and the awareness of especially racial relations around the world, how we want to be governed, all kinds of other things that are coming forth, especially, beneath the surface, sex trafficking and all of these horrible issues that have been hidden and buried. In my Rahu in Taurus and Ketu in Scorpio web class, I talked about all this. So go ahead and register for that. It's free. It's free. It's more than an hour. I also talk about that transit for all 12 signs, including yours. So you'll also see how this is going to affect your sign. But I also talk about all of these dramatic cultural shifts. Again, like with the, trying to bring to justice. K2 in Scorpio is going to be wanting to get more justice, going down deep into that warrior mode, Jeshta Nakshatra, and that warrior mode where we are not just triggered and believing stupid stuff that is not that's not grounded. So I have the if you see here, let me pull it up. If you see here, I have the when you click on that link, you go here to this web page. And again, it's very easy to just go here, reserve your spot. I'm going to be adding more dates and times, but there's many over the next few days. And again, I learned the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio for you and all 12 signs. Again, it's going to be the best time to stay centered because it's going to be huge shifts. I talked about the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio historically, like I just did some history here. It's remarkable. The last time Taurus went through, or that Rahu went through Taurus, is when we had SARS. It's also when we had the Iran war. It's also when the Department of Homeland Security was developed. It's also when we finished the Human Genome Project. All of these kinds of issues are up right now. They're up right now. We're even revisiting all of these issues around Department of Homeland Security, because those forces that are being sent into the cities, they're from Homeland Security, this police force that didn't even exist 20 years ago. So these are major issues. The Genome Project is big. All of our relationship with genetics and whatnot is big now, because we're trying to handle COVID and develop vaccines and cures that get in and work with our DNA. All of this kind of stuff is very, very big. And again, even SARS was 20 years. It was the last time Rahu went through Taurus. So now we're dealing with COVID. But then the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio Nakshatras. So I talk about each nakshatra. Again, when I was talking about Ketu going through Jeshta, it's very important to bringing to justice a lot of the darkness that has infected our world. Again, things like the child sex trafficking and the trials of Epstein, who is dead, but Maxwell, and also, bringing bringing justice to Black communities around the world, in the U.S. as well, and really coming together as a family, as one country, but as one world, realizing what the lessons that we can learn from COVID. The interconnectedness, we need more compassion toward nature, toward animals, especially not eating them as much or at all. So this is a huge shift. Rahu through Taurus, Ketu through Scorpio. And it's free. You just sit there and listen. And I'm also going to talk about, also had some very good remedies for each, for everyone to really tune into the highest vibrations and the highest lessons. And the eclipses during the nodes and Taurus, the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio, very important. So again, all you need to do is go there. You go at that link, put it there again, and this is what we have here. And so if you click that, you can just register. But again, I hope this, I know people get really triggered around politics and stuff. And, I just have to try to do my best and be honest. I don't want to offend anyone. I've never unfriended or disliked or hated anyone for their views on politics. I don't care what they are. I don't. I think one of the biggest problems we have right now isn't people's views. It's how people are handling them. Again, like there'll be people who will come and just start calling me names and da-da-da-da and this and that, because they don't agree with like my politics or something like that. And again, these are the kinds of things where we have to get back to treating each other humanely. These politicians and this politics is not the real thing. They're like the appearance. What's behind the veil is what's important. And what I said at the beginning, and it's the reason why I started saying this a little bit, is because what's really happening is both political parties, the entire system has changed so much now. That it used to be that you could actually work a job. We actually had a quality of life. By the way, there's more of that in Europe. In the US, we have gone off the rails. All the money we spend on weapons and defense and all this other stuff. And then the giveaways to the corporations so that normal working people can't afford anything. You have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to afford to live. And then if you have kids that want to go to college, again, more loans to banks in this entire corrupt system that both parties are engaged in. And instead, we just fight with each other over these dumb politicians. And again, you think that's not what they want? So again, I hope we were all going to wake up to these kinds of realities. And I hope that this transit of Rahu through Gemini and Ketu through Sagittarius, which is what I've been saying, is going to show us that, look, we're just all spinning our wheels here. We need to connect with ourselves, each other, the earth, nature, animals. and stop letting these systems and oligarchies and whatnot turn us on each other. So I'll leave that. That's enough of my speech. Sorry, I get on speeches sometimes. No. So anyway, I hope this was helpful for people to hear. And we'll just leave it at that. Share this with others if you think it was helpful. And thanks for your attention.